And that's because joy is very much connected to resilience and rising above the challenges that we face. So we're allowed to have those challenges and we're allowed to feel all of the emotions that come with it. We learned that joy is the thing that people have been using to rise above those challenges.
You're listening to the TJ Moore Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Pamela Larde from Atlanta, Georgia. She's an author, researcher, and joy scholar. Pamela has written the books The Joy Whisperer and Joyfully Single, founded the Academy of Creative Coaching, and serves as Associate Professor of Leadership Studies at Anderson University. She has chaired more than 80 dissertation committees, and her research gave rise to the Multidimensional Framework of Joy. She helps people come alive through what she calls Defiant Aliveness. Additionally, she serves as Director of Education at Harvard's Institute of Coaching and uses all of these skills as operator and majority investment partner of the Atlanta Truth women's pro tackle football team. Pamela, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, TJ.
You've often said that joy is different from happiness. What is the biggest misconception that people have with this difference?
The way that I look at joy is that it is more internally rooted and that it's more of a sort of expression of the soul, whereas happiness is more of an expression of your surroundings and your life circumstances. So often happiness researchers look at life circumstances. You know, do you have the different components of life that you need? Security, safety, and that can be from a financial standpoint, a psychological standpoint, support from people around you, deep relationships, health and well-being, and so forth. Joy can exist in the absence of all of those things. Joy can exist with somebody who doesn't feel safe or somebody who doesn't have enough food or a good job. And so the difference is really where it's rooted and what causes it.
And you go by a joy scholar. So what does science tell us about joy that people might not know?
Joy is actually something that people have to practice and create within their own lives. And it doesn't always look the same. It's not even sometimes I don't jump for joy even when I am feeling joy in the morning. The jumping for joy for me comes at night. But when I do wake up in the morning and I've learned to practice joy, it comes a little quieter. It comes in the form of just saying, thank you.
When you're in nature, let's say you're in your favorite place to walk or a hike or somewhere that you can see the sky, the trees, wildlife, all kinds of things that are not in your day-to-day, urban lifestyle if you live in a city.
Yes.
So some of those feelings to me are wonder, which is more about the mystery of nature and science, awe, appreciation, gratitude, anything that helps us look up or look around or become more aware of our senses. They even made it a title of a movie that was about conspiracy theories and denying science called Don't Look Up.
I love that movie. Yes.
Even before I even knew what the premise of the movie was, it was already communicating to me sort of the irony of if you look up, you might experience wonder or awe or appreciation or joy, but we don't want you to do that.
Yes, that's a really great analogy. And that story has so many other messages, but
Yeah, it's definitely very sarcastically told, but from so many different angles. I actually love Cate Blanchett's role in that as the news reporter who's trying to manipulate Leonardo DiCaprio. She's my favorite.
So good. So good. Yeah. I mean, and you said all the key words. I was going to say buzzwords, but in science, this idea of awe is a big one. That's a part of my research now. I've really been looking a lot at this idea of awe. And one other word I would add to that list is savoring. We talk about gratitude a lot. I host a retreat in Costa Rica, and one year it was on Thanksgiving week here in the United States. And it was just a bunch of people who were like, we don't have anything to do on Thanksgiving. So we all went to Costa Rica. And in that Thursday, Thanksgiving morning, I challenged them to think a little bit differently about gratitude and how that might look. For example, if you're eating something, it's great to be thankful for what you're about to eat or what you ate. But there's another dynamic to that when you think about savoring what it is that you're eating. And now you're taking a little bit more time. And to your point, you're engaging your senses and it becomes more of an experience. And gratitude is great because this is by no means to, diminish gratitude. But when we're talking about savoring, that's just another level, another layer of a way to get to joy.
I have a book about this, the topic of savoring, on my shelf called Life in Five Senses.
Ooh.
In December of 2019, you experienced a breakthrough when you connected in your research. There was a common thread running through different populations that you had studied for more than a decade. So how did this discovery change the direction of your focus?
So from the beginning of my research life that started before my doctoral program, and I studied first generation students and how they got to college and learned the barriers and the challenges that they faced getting there. So my research really started off with how people were determined to overcome, an unusual goal or a challenging goal. I then moved into, because of a request from the state of Georgia, I started looking at military families and and that seems so different, right? And the reason why I started looking at military families is because my first study looked at self-determination. And they said, how does self-determination apply to military families and service members after they return back from combat? So we looked at that. And so that became sort of a focus over the next 10 years after that. I also looked at divorcees and how they overcame heartbreak. And I looked at also first generation college students in terms of those who have experienced trauma specifically, or were living in trauma environments, neighborhoods, or homes, and how they still, in spite of that, pursued their education. And that was the reason why I started looking at the common thread, because I kept getting questions. What does a military service person coming back to combat have to do with a first generation student deciding to go back to college? And what does that have to do with somebody who just got divorced? It really became obvious to me that they are all seeking their joy. They are trying to find ways to seek out joy. And now aliveness is becoming a big part of my work as well. But they're finding ways to come alive despite the challenges. And that's why joy is such a different question than happiness. None of these people are going to tell you they were happy in the midst of their situations. Am I happy going through a divorce? No. Am I happy when I am in combat and recovering from the trauma of that? No. And it's almost insulting to ask somebody to be happy. So what's the difference then? Why is it not insulting to examine the joy that might exist? And that's because joy is very much connected to resilience and rising above the challenges that we face. So we're allowed to have those challenges and we're allowed to feel all of the emotions that come with it. And we learned that joy is the thing that people have been using to rise above those challenges. So that was 2019, right before 3 months before we all shut down in COVID. So I thought I was going to be able to start studying joy from the lens of a normal society, and then boom.
Nope.
We're all locked down.
Yeah, I was working in a corporate office at that time, and I remember it was March 12th, 2020. I had taken my car to get serviced, and it came on TV, worldwide pandemic. I drove back to the office, and then they had someone come in and said, we're going home early. This is why. And I went to my coworkers in my area, and I said, get everything out of the building because they are not letting you come back here.
Whoa. No, that's interesting to hear because I was already remote. So I hadn't really heard a lot of stories about what that day looked like for those who were actually at work and needed to pack it up.
This idea that when there's a massive life change, joy is almost like an overriding program of like, all right, I got off track, but I'm going to redirect myself, whatever it takes, to get back on track and back into alignment. And I think of the Disney Pixar Inside Out films where the other emotions are literally pushing the buttons, pulling the levers. They're taking over in all of these major life changes, such as moving or starting at a new school. But
Yeah.
then there's moments where Joy is like, I've had enough with all of you. Like, get off the control panel. It's almost like this righteous indignation takes over. And she's like, it's my turn now.
Right. It's such a beautiful picture of what that looks like in the science. I'm blown away by how well they did that. But yes.
They're universal experiences inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
But to visualize that, I was like, where was this when I was a kid? I needed these tools. I needed these examples. I needed these characters to know that it's not all like controlling me all the time, that there is some discernment and choice involved with your emotions too.
Brene Brown talks about this idea of foreboding joy. And that what if I really, allow myself to go all the way there, to get all the way excited and lean into this joy, life of joy. There's no way it's going to last forever. Surely something's going to happen. Somebody is going to die. Somebody's going to go into the hospital. A diagnosis is going to happen. I'm going to lose something. So I think I just want to stay even so that the fall isn't so dramatic. And so some people stay away from it for fear that the fall will be too painful.
You also use a term called the numbness tax. So what is that? And how can someone tell if that's affecting them?
The thing that caused you to fall before, joy played a part in bringing you back. And so it's like we forget that no matter how hard I fall or no matter what that feels like on the way down, I still have that same joy in me that can sustain me and pull me through the way it did first time. We just forget. The numbness tax speaks specifically more so in the workplace, but it is something that I think can affect us across all aspects of our lives. It's the cost that we pay for going numb, for not really leaning all the way into what it is that we're doing, whether that's the workplace or our marriage or, whatever, our parenting. And we just kind of go numb, do it in autopilot. The workforce globally suffers $1 trillion for the lack of, people really leaning into the work that they're doing. And that's because they're in places where it's like, I don't really care about this. And so when we don't have that sense of aliveness, there, we suffer for that. And our organizations suffer for that. Our dreams suffer for that.
It makes me think of the difference between surviving and thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And how if passion is not leading you or guiding you at all in what you're doing for your career, it usually can be an indicator that maybe you need to look for other solutions to that. Like, what does excite you? What does light you up? Because you don't want to be doing something for too long in your life. It can actually age you. I've been in the wrong companies or the wrong career path where I started to look in the mirror and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like weirdly like aging at a rapid rate that I could notice. And then I was like, okay, this is the stress, like on a microbiology level, the stress is ruining my skin. It's ruining my vitality under my eyes. Like it starts to take a physical, emotional, spiritual toll if you're not being driven by something. And the analogy I wanted to share was that joy can almost be like a compass guiding you in a better direction. Mm-hmm. If you've gotten off the path, it's like, okay, now go over here now. Now it's time to make a change.
If I knew that my book had just come out and I knew that you had time to receive it and read it, I'd say, oh, you got that analogy from the book.
Really? You use the compass?
Subtle. It's a subtle analogy, but yes, everybody is heading north. And if people understand what north means, then yeah. In workplaces, in which people are feeling they don't have that sense of aliveness, and it could be a culture. It could be an entire culture in that workplace where people are like, I'm just skating by. I don't really want to be here. Some of the things that companies have started to do are these wellness initiatives. So, we're going to do a yoga day. We're going to have some incentives where you can even speak to a life coach. We're going to do this and this, all these things to help your wellness. And there's a difference between well-being and wellness. Wellness are, sets of activities, that we can do, which are not bad. But if they don't address the root problem, then it's not going to change their level of aliveness at work. So we can all get together and do yoga, but we hate this place and we hate the person that's leading it, but okay, I'll just do it. Those wellness activities don't necessarily resolve the organizational toxicity that might exist and that is causing people to feel numb.
I've had coworkers that are at the right company at the right time of their development, but for some reason, they're not in the right job at that company. And I don't know why, like no one can tell them or they don't figure it out or HR or their boss. But I'm like, okay, you're so good. Like the time flies by when you're doing these things, but then you're in this department doing something you absolutely hate that's like soul sucking. But you can't see if you just crossed the hall and were with that group doing those tasks, you'd be so happy.
Oh, everything you're saying it resonates on the football field. Thinking about people who are in the wrong position. And this is me as a leader thinking about, okay, are they in the right position? Because I know they're good and I know they can thrive over here. And yeah, that's so interesting.
So if someone is listening to this and they're feeling disconnected, exhausted, they're feeling that numbness tax that you're talking about, where should they begin to make a change or improve that?
This is where people can kind of think about, where do I have a sense of agency? And if we're not familiar with that particular language, it's just, where do I have the power to make a change or to create a choice in this situation? Everybody can't jump and quit their jobs in a certain time frame. Everybody can't tell their boss off. But what can you do? What are some of the things within your own scope of power that you can change? And that can be, how I show up in terms of, am I going to be able to say no to certain things? What will I do during my lunch break? Am I going to sit at the desk or am I going to leave the building? Who am I going to engage with? Who can I vent to? It may not be somebody who's right in the building, in the organization. It might be somebody else. But what are those little small micro steps of power and joy and agency that you can take that will at least get you in the direction of where you need to go? And it may not be that I'm going to do a whole entire social movement at the job and change everything, but what can I do incrementally to change things for myself? Your
research has led to creating this multidimensional framework of joy. So can you walk us through that concept?
The multidimensional framework of joy essentially has 4 dimensions. And what it does is it shows us where joy is rooted and then sort of the outcomes of that. And so first and foremost, it's rooted in our well-being. It doesn't mean that I'm in optimal health or that I'm, everything is perfect in my life, but it means that I am doing the work to support, defend, and grow my well-being in any way that's possible. I was just recently in South Africa speaking about this framework, and a young lady raised her hand. She had an amazing question. And she said, well, when I think back to my ancestry and some of the things that they experienced with slavery, their whole humanity is being diminished. How can somebody experience well-being in that place? And I think it's an important question because it helps make the distinction between what it means to experience optimal well-being or to be in a place where you are fighting for your well-being. So if we think about that in terms of a continuum, well-being is the distinction between where we are experiencing flourishing versus languishing. So somebody in my ancestral past, for example, was probably experiencing languishing every day. But does it mean that they weren't fighting for their well-being? Does it mean that there was no effort whatsoever to become well? No. It's important for us to understand it doesn't mean we're in optimal health. Somebody who is struggling with a terminal diagnosis can still pursue their well-being from an emotional, spiritual, and even physical perspective to some extent. The 2 connecting pieces to that is community. So the extent to which you have a safe community, this could be 1 or 2 people, but somebody that you can connect with that helps to nurture your joy and well-being. And then on the other hand, it is integration, which means how do you integrate joy practices or how do you integrate well-being practices into your life? The more you're working towards your well-being, the more likely you are to start connecting with people who nurture that well-being. And so your communities are going to be more stronger. Your positive communities are going to be stronger. In the same sense, your practices of joy are going to be healthier and stronger if you are already working on your well-being. And what that culminates to, your communities, your practices, culminates to liberation. And liberation can be anything from liberated from a toxic relationship to liberated from a really bad job to liberated from mindsets that hold you back. The idea here is that starting from your well-being, working through your relationships and your practices brings you to a place where you can start experiencing different levels of liberation. And so that's the multidimensional framework of joy. It's the idea that it's not just one thing or one easy definition, but that it is multifaceted and that there are different elements of it that help bring us to a place of liberation.
I like that you use the term continuum, like it's a spectrum from languishing to flourishing, and how it doesn't have to be just a physical enslavement for someone to experience liberation. Even in the scenarios where people had generational physical enslavement, we know that there's a large history of a sense of community, a sense of looking forward, a sense of hope, also the singing of songs, writing songs, making the time go faster, things like that. And you teach the idea of defiant aliveness. So why is this especially relevant today?
Defiant aliveness is exactly what you described. I'm going to push forward anyway. I am going to be alive and fiercely alive and in your face alive anyway. And it's not always in your face alive. The data I'm collecting right now shows women who are talking, Black women in particular, who are part of the study are saying, I'm engaging in conversations offline in private groups as my form of defiant aliveness, because I know the consequences for speaking some of this stuff out loud. So, but I have to speak it anyway. And so voice is a really powerful factor when it comes to aliveness. And in particular, the defiant aliveness strategy has been, I'm going to find ways to use my voice however I can. My grandmother is a really great example of this. She had been declining for a while, and she was in the hospital, and they called us and they said, look, it's time for hospice. She only has about, a day or so. So we're going to, transfer her over to hospice. We were saying our goodbyes. We were crying. We were on FaceTime, actually. And she didn't really seem to be fully aware that we were talking to her. But we got off the FaceTime, and they were going to take her home, and there was going to be a hospice nurse there. And as soon as she got home, she sprung up and she said, I'm hungry. What? I'm hungry. So okay. So got her the food, and long story short, she lived another 3 years.
One of the worst things doctors can do to squash that defiant aliveness is give people timelines of how long they're going to live. Even having an expectation of your own decline can literally become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The only benefit I can see to that is it does give them a higher priority to reach some sense of closure or to get things in order. If it's really, serious in some cases of terminal disease, we find that many people outlive those estimations by months or years. They're like, I'm not going to accept that timeline for myself. I'm going to wake up and do what I can, take care of my health and feel my best. And that is their own defiant aliveness sort of overriding and being like, nope, not me. I'm not going to be in that side of that statistic.
And she was in her 90s when this happened. And I think she just wanted to get out of the hospital.
For sure. Get back home and have some freedom.
How do we remain defiantly alive in times like this, when, every generation has times like this. So how do we remain defiantly alive with this being our time? It was actually a blessing that the joy thing came up for me in December 2019, because then I had the opportunity to look at how people experience joy through some of the most difficult times in life. And that's precisely what my research is looking at right now, how people are experiencing defiant aliveness, especially if they've been targeted by some of the changes that have happened over the last year and a half. And whether it's government changes, new policies and laws, a focus on immigration. So I'm looking at all of those populations of people who have been impacted and finding out from the people who have figured out, I'm going to fiercely be alive anyway. And I'm not talking about blood pumping and all that. I'm talking about from the soul. Like, I am going to be, have a sense of livelihood through all of this. What are they doing and how are they doing it? And I'm finding people are convening in their circles. They're finding solace in their communities. They are finding their voices. They are resting. They are making decisions around what they want to put their energy into and what they are like, not right now. I am taking a break from, all of this. And so people have a wide range of strategies, but we are out, including myself, but we are out here finding ways to stay defiantly alive every single day.
You've been friends with a NASA astronaut named Victor Glover for more than 35 years. He was on the Artemis II crew, one of the 4 people to fly around the moon and collect all the new data that they were doing for their tests. So what have you learned from being friends with Victor?
It's crazy that you say 35 years because I feel like I'm 35 years old. So like, how is that even possible? But yeah, we've been friends since freshman year in high school. And then we both went to college together. And so, a whole stint of our young adulthood was these crazy life dreaming conversations about where we wanted to go with life and what we wanted to be, and these philosophical conversations about leadership and integrity and love and all of these things that we wanted to see the world through those lenses. We had an amazing friend crew. I was really kind of the only girl. And it was the guys, and they called themselves Knights of the Round Table. And I was like, and me too. There were 3 of us that in particular were the closest, me, Victor, and Major. And we would have these really intense, deep philosophical conversations about life. We didn't care about how we expressed joy or how we expressed anything. We just were who we were. And it was probably the only group where I didn't feel like I had to be cool or put on this facade or be tough. I was literally able to just be 100% my silly, goofy self with no judgment. So the Victor that we see in those interviews and all the deep, profound things he's saying is exactly the same things he was saying when we were 15. He has maintained that same sense of, I know who I am and I know who I want to become. And I'm keeping my eyes and my heart on that vision. And so we've seen each other through all kinds of different life transitions. And it is amazing to be able to say, at the core, we are the same people that we were, back as these awkward, acne teenagers. So
yeah, isn't that remarkable to realize that someone has literally traveled farther in space than any human being, and yet he's still the same person on the inside that you grew up with? The day they landed, they went on a media press tour like most people will never experience. And what made me very emotional watching all of their interviews was that they said they were feeling things being at that vantage point, not of just the earth or the moon or the sun, but to see the stars from that vantage point. I mean, it was very emotional for them.
Yeah. And they called it moon joy. And I thought, that probably embodies that experience more than anything I can think of.
When you were 48 years old, you joined a professional women's tackle football team, the Atlanta Truth, and now you're actually the majority operator and investment partner of that team.
And that's another amazing thing about my college career at Cal Poly. Not only, did I go to college with Victor, but I also went to college with the woman who founded the WNFC, the Women's National Football Conference, which is how I learned that there was an opportunity to try out for a pro women's football team. Atlanta had just gotten its own team a couple of years ago. And it is a league with 17 teams across the country. We are considered the sister league to the NFL, recognized by a number of different larger entities. I was about to be an empty nester, and I decided, you know what? Why don't I try out? I've always been an athlete. I qualified for the U.S. Olympic softball team in 1996. So I was having kids, and I was like, okay, other end of this. I'm about to be an empty nester. Let me try out. And lo and behold, I go out there with all 48 years of myself out there with 20-year-olds and, maybe 30. I made the team. So I got the call. Congratulations, you have made the team. I've never played tackle football. I've played flag a little bit. I've done tennis. I've played softball, basketball. I'm just an athlete all around. So I was counting on my athleticism to get me on the team, and it did. Unfortunately, within, about 4 months, I pulled a hamstring. So I wasn't able to live out through the full force of that season. Although I stayed on the team as injury reserve, I went to all the get practices games, helped out where I could, worked out, was in physical therapy, and ready to come back the next season, age 49, right? So at that time, we learned that there was going to be a transition in ownership. And as I'm sitting in the meeting with our teammates, I'm texting my two girlfriends who I've done business with before, and I say, how do you feel about acquiring a pro women's football team?
Imagine getting that text and being like, never really thought about it.
Oh my goodness. It would be the best movie, because to see their separate reactions and their separate locations, they didn't know each other before this. But a week later, we were on a plane to Dallas, where the headquarters are, and having a meeting with the commissioner and the president. And months later, after a whole lot of talking, negotiating, and processes, we were selected to assume the role. So I obviously resigned as a player and decided to step into leadership. And we are stepping into professional women's sports in a season and an era where women's sports is finally starting to get its recognition and its kudos. And we're seeing what's happening with women's basketball and so many other sports. Flag football is going to be in the Olympics in 2028. I'm just grateful to be in on this in this era when we're really starting to recognize and appreciate women in sports from a leadership standpoint. I don't have to be on the field anymore.
Now, I want to go over two of the books that you've written. The first one was called Joyfully Single, and then we'll get to The Joy Whisperer briefly. There's a lot of pressure from society and families, parents, grandparents, to get married at a certain age or a certain chapter of life. And there's also another element for women called the biological clock, if you want to have children. So your book, Joyfully Single, challenges a lot of cultural assumptions. So what inspired you to write it?
I was divorced when I was 33. And I thought, you do all the right things, right? You go, for me, all the right things was, I'm going to go to church and I'm going to pray for a husband, and I'm going to do I'm going to be focused. I'm going to get my life together. I'm going to be this woman that everybody wants. And 10 years later, I was still single. Like, it didn't work. None of that. None of that translated into instant husband. And there was a time when I actually believed that you do all these things. Like, there's a formula. You do these things, you get this. And sometimes that works. And sometimes it looks like it works and it may have had nothing to do with any of those things. I've had friends who didn't do any of those right things, and they've been married for 20 years. So wait a minute. And so I went through this anger moment, like, what did I do wrong? How come it's not working? And so I definitely went through this era of anger. Like, I'm a good person. I keep up with my body. I I'm a smart like I had all the things that I thought would check the box, and yet I was still single. So once I came out of anger, I started to make decisions around loving my life as it was. I can't let whether or not I have a significant other in my life determine whether or not I'm going to experience joy and fullness of life. And so I started doing things very intentionally. I started traveling every month. But that saved me. I was able to find creative ways to fully step into life. And as I did that, 4 or 5 years into that, and so now we're talking like 12, 13 years divorced, I stopped being angry and I started actually really loving my life to the point where I wasn't worried about whether or not I had partnership. My best friend, who is also a coach, asked me one day, she said, Pam, what if you actually never found partnership? You never found a spouse. Is the rest of your life going to be about lamenting that? That hit home. And so I decided, and it's a decision, to start living my life regardless of whether or not I ended up partnered. The ironic thing, though, is that once actually the day that the book was due to be submitted to the editor, it was going to be released that year, I did end up meeting somebody. Our first date was the day I had to submit it to the editor.
That's amazing. He's like, what's your new book? Honey, I am joyfully single. And
right.
You want to date me?
Right. And that day ended up lasting on. We went to dinner, and then he said, well, do you want to go? I want to watch. He's a 49ers fan, and it was like playoffs. Do you want to go, to the sports bar across the street and watch playoffs? I was like, I've got to get this book in by the deadline. He said, bring your laptop. So I brought my laptop, finished up the book while he's watching playoffs. And I was like, oh, this is the one. We
got a winner. Ding, ding.
This is it. And we are still together. So that was 3.5 years ago. And so I guess just me focusing on what I love and what I'm doing and my fullness of life, I would have been fine either way.
The researcher side of you might appreciate, there's a concept in the movie Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell, where the professor of literature tells him, the narrator that you're hearing, I want you to go around with a notebook, and everything that happens to you, I want you to have on one page a tragedy or a comedy. He says, if it's a tragedy, you'll feel bad. You might even die. If it's a comedy, your romantic life will move forward. You might even get married, So he starts to make a tally of back and forth and sort of like become aware of what are his expectations of his life being joyful or tragic. And it's almost like you had to write this book and express that, not only express it, but you're giving the tools to whomever is going to read it. Could be so many people over decades who are picking up that book, and it resonates with the chapter of life that they are in, being single.
Yes.
However, I'm sure there are components of that are also preparing them for the opportunity of stepping into a relationship if there is compatibility, which we cannot always rush. Your newest book is called The Joy Whisperer. Yes. And I want to ask you, why do so many people postpone their own joy for a certain milestone or that dream relationship or achievement?
One of the things that you'll see with the characters in this book is that, because this is fiction, which is, I haven't done fiction. So one of the things you'll see is that they did not believe or conceptualize that joy was even a thing that they can pursue. So sometimes people postpone it like, when I get married, or, when I get this job, and sometimes it probably more often than not, people are just numb and they are just kind of going through life. And if something happens, it might catch them off guard. Like, oh, wow, that was awesome. Back to numbness. And so I think we just often don't put a whole lot of energy into creating those joyful moments because we don't really think there's a few things that causes that. I feel guilty because other people are struggling. So I'm not going to over exude my joy or try to pursue my joy, because how does that land on other people? But there's also a lot of shaming, why are you so happy about this? You need to calm down. I got that a lot in particularly one relationship that I was in. If I was too overjoyed, it was like, what are you doing?
Let's bring it back down to earth.
Bring it down.
Yeah. I think of it as a measurement of your positive energy. So if your positive energy is it's like being raised and raised and raised, and then they're trying to have a conversation with you, that's not where they're at. They're
Right.
more at maybe a midline level of energy, more neutral. But for someone to be just explaining all the incredible things that are happening, and it can feel like, oh gosh, now I got to like raise my energy up to sort of meet you in the middle. And
Yes.
it can feel they don't want to fake it. So they're like, well, my solution is to bring you down to my level so we can have a conversation.
Exactly. It can make people feel very uncomfortable. And so I don't think it's always that people are postponing their joy. I think it's often that they don't even think joy is an option, or that it's just too unrealistic. Where are we even aspiring to that life? Let's be real.
Sometimes you get clarity. We call it inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
You get a vision of, you know what, I'm going to go there and do this, and it's going to look like this. All the ideas start collecting, almost like a gravitational force field of ideas and inspiration. You're like, ooh, now I know how to move forward. And it can feel like the clarity sets in, but the excitement level of the discovery of that inspiration, it can feel completely unrelatable. And not only that, they might think that you're not worthy of that vision because they know the past you. They're like, how could you, whom I've known for your entire life, how could you take a path toward that?
I call it our fragmented community. And those are the people who are not good for us. And it could be a parent, it could be a friend, but we have to know where they are so that we know not to share things like that with them.
Sometimes it's just not the right time to share your incredible dream for the future if somebody is not, or even the setting. Sometimes in a public setting is not always the place to be like, this is my vision for my life at the highest level. They're like, girl, we are just getting Panera today. The easiest way to buy Pamela's book, The Joy Whisperer, is to go directly to her website, drpamelalarde.com/book. And doctor, for those listening, is just drpamelalarde.com/book. And you also are the founder and president of the Academy of Creative Coaching, which is a global ICF accredited training organization. People come to our school from all over the world to become certified coaches. They get to pick their specialization. So we've had spiritual coaches, relationship coaches, executive coaches, just a wide range, depending on what your background and experience reflects. It is an 18-month program, and people come out as legitimate certified coaches. So for all the details that people can find about this organization, go to academyofcreativecoaching.com. So on Pamela's main website, which is drpamelalarde.com, she has a joy assessment, and that is an acronym that spells Journey of You. And this is a reflective survey with multiple choice questions that goes across 9 different life dimensions, such as work and education, social engagement, finances, family, friends. So there's a lot of categories. When someone goes on your website and fills this out, what is the goal that you're trying to bring them awareness of in their own life related to joy? With those 9 life domains, it kind of helps to look at that in a visual manner. So you might notice that you've scored higher in housing security and much lower when it comes to relationships. And so it kind of gives you a benchmark for, what do I need to zoom in on over the next few months, maybe, in order to address this? And it might be things that you already know, and it just kind of confirms that, yeah, that's about right. I definitely have had a financial, dip over the last, few years. And so especially it's helpful for me as a coach when I'm working with a client to get an idea of what that baseline of joy looks like for them in those different areas of their life. Yeah, it's a great place place to start when you can see more the big picture. Like these are all different slices of their life's pie, so to speak. And some of them are going to be fuller and larger and more advanced and richer, and others are going to be more starved for attention that they need to make an improvement on. And so how does this factor into the research you're doing now when you're collecting all this data from people that are filling that out on your website?
Yeah, so there is an option to opt in or opt out of the research study when you fill out the form. Most people opt in. It's anonymous, so I don't necessarily take all of your personal information and use that in as far as the assessment goes. But it allows me to analyze where people are experiencing more joy, more pain, especially in this season, versus when I first put the assessment out, which was a couple of years ago, and just kind of looking at where people are and plotting that out. My other research is really looking in a more qualitative way where I'm interviewing people. And so I also have them fill out the form. So it allows me to make correlations between what they're saying to me and what they're experiencing according to that assessment in those 9 different life areas.
So I can relate to both sides of this, where I've been taking surveys and I've also been the person designing a survey because I had courses in college. It was the statistics of behavioral psychology. And it was very revealing how, like, where are these universities or companies getting these statistics? Well, then you learn they need a certain sample size and they need to have enough people filling it out objectively and enough demographic variety to where you can actually say, like, okay, we're making a discovery along a certain path. And the information, the data starts to reveal its own story. Like the goal is not to be putting our narrative on the research, but to let it tell the story.
Yes, exactly. And it's been pretty intriguing to see, just different results as I am able to talk to the people who are, taking the assessment. That's not always the case. If they're in my study specifically, I get to do both. But if they just come to the website because they want their own results, if they opt in, then I get to sort of include that in the overall analysis.
There's 2 ways to contact Pamela directly. You can go on LinkedIn and search Dr. Pamela Larde, Ph.D., and also her website. But on social media, the best place to find her is on Instagram at J.O.Y Researcher. And I've been to her page and she has all kinds of incredible creative videos and graphics. It's very visual, which I appreciate because I'm from the TV and film marketing world. It's super engaging. And even the covers of her books are very colorfully designed and eye-catching. So I just wanted to mention that if you want to learn more about her books, going on Instagram at J.O.Y Researcher is a great place to start. So
every year, twice a year, I do a retreat. It's called the Epic Joy Retreat. And that is a culmination of all of my work around joy and aliveness and agency. And it's really an opportunity to just do a deep dive, to engage with other people who are seeking joy, and to come away with tools to practice joy, both personally and professionally, and to look at how those things can come together. So I really encourage people to just check out my website and look at when the next dates are for the retreat, and jump in. It's a lot of fun.
Pamela, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I really had a great time discussing all of this that you care about. All of these topics are so relevant now to look at from all these different angles.
Thank you so much for having me on.
To hear more experts share their story, subscribe to the TJ Moore Podcast on YouTube and follow this show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to listen anywhere you go. Like and comment on this video if you found today's conversation valuable, and share this episode with someone in your life. I'll see you next week.